What's going on, my martial arts nerds? As always, I am Greg Koval, and today we're talking about system breakdowns of Petr Yan. This guy is a great case study. I'm really excited about presenting this, and there's a couple things that I really want to focus on. The first thing is that because he is a master of sport in boxing with 70 amateur fights, I want to talk about how everything kind of pulls the fight back to where he is strongest, and how he puts the fight on his terms. It's not to say that he's not fantastic in wrestling and doing some other stuff like this. Last fight against Corey Sandhagen, he was throwing like spinning hook kicks and stuff like that. He can do all these things really well, but really his A game is the boxing, and I want to talk about how he brings it to that. The other thing I want to talk about is why his style of boxing is so effective within MMA, because there are a lot of guys who bring in boxing and they eat a lot of shots. Particularly when you compare somebody like Justin Gaethje to Petr Yan, and you talk about the use of the high guard and how that compares between these two fighters. I want to kind of use this as a comparison because Justin Gaethje is a fantastic fighter. He's got an iron chin. He's an amazing wrestler. He likes to bang. But he absorbs a lot of shots and he eats a lot of shots. Whereas Petr Yan doesn't really eat that many shots. He has a very strong defense. And so I want to kind of compare and contrast the two so that I can explain what he does that's so different, so that we can kind of look at how we can implement this in our own games. But he is an excellent case study. Like I said, he's a master of sport in boxing. He's got 70 amateur fights. In the UFC, to be honest, the only guy who's ever beaten him is himself when he kneed Aljamain Sterling in the face. So I want to kind of touch on all the things that makes him able to pull this back into his strong suit and put the fight on his terms. So that being said, stay tuned and let's get to the breakdown of Petr Yan. Alright guys, so let's start talking about the basic structure of Petr Yan. There's a lot I got to get through on this, but it's all super important. First of all, what you're going to see, and this is one of the major differences between him and a Justin Gaethje. Justin Gaethje, he keeps his high guard the whole time. If you look at Petr Yan, he uses an expanding and contracting guard, very similar to what we do in the Nemean fight system, but done in a slightly different way. What he does is he plays him this long guard from the outside, and as he closes in, he's going to switch to the high guard. The reason he does this is from right here. He wants to fill in this void here because nature hates a vacuum. He doesn't want guys throwing a lot of stuff, so he's going to cover and obstruct this pipe down here to make it hard for them to try to have a clean access to him. As he comes in, he's going to tighten the ranks because he's going to be focused more on things from the outside, the hooks and uppercuts, and this is going to allow him to protect himself much more effectively as he moves forward. Now, footwork is an important part of his game because it ties in heavily with forward pressure. Forward pressure is a constant thing for him. He wants them to feel like they're constantly running, and he's very good at this. So what is he going to do? When guys throw attacks, if he's going to backstep at all to evade, it's a normal thing to do, to try to move back and avoid stuff. I do it a lot. Everybody does it. He keeps his movements very small. He moves just enough to avoid. He's not trying to move a lot. But then, as he moves forward, he's going to take big steps. Part of the reason he does a lot of stance switching offensively is to cover ground. This is much harder to cover ground than taking a big step and fully stepping into it and switching stance on your attack. This is why you see him doing here this type of stuff. Jab, cross, cross. Part of the reason he does this is because of the fact that the blitz step work covers more ground, and this is an important aspect of what he's trying to do. As he advances forward, if I take a sliding step forward, it doesn't cover nearly as much ground, and I want to be able to chase this guy because he knows that one of the most common defenses for guys is to do this to avoid getting hit. So he needs to be able to cover ground quickly. So he uses this karate blitz style footwork where he goes here and then pop, pop, like so. A lot of times he's going to make this a little bit of a loopier punch. He likes to throw these big hooks to try to finish it. And I think he does that because it's very similar like the Joe Frazier style, where when Joe Frazier fought Ali, took these big swinging hooks, right? I think Petr Yan does a lot of that. He wants to take these big swings to try to catch a guy as they're retreating out. This is all tied in with his forward pressure. So stance switching offensively is just part of covering ground. Okay? Now, the next thing I want to notate on here is talk about how his defense kind of builds together. When you have a high guard, he understands that the biggest threats to him from here is not these hooks and uppercuts and stuff like that. Rounded punches, he's basically pretty contained for. So he can keep a very contained base and not have to worry about it too much. What he's concerned with is three things. One, punches coming down the pipe. He wants the jab and cross. He wants to draw this out by funneling it out of him. He wants those punches so he can counter them. The second thing is going to be dealing with kicks. Now, kicking, most of his kicking, if you kick to the side of his body, he's not too worried. He's pretty contained. Guys don't feel like that's an attack they can go for easily. So he's not super worried about it. So instead, he just covers up tight. If you throw a roundhouse, no problem. He can absorb this. That's a big part of it. It's evade and absorb so that he can then counter, funnel them down to predictable attacks, and then he's going to start figuring out where you're weak and attacking and exploiting those things. That's basically his game. So when you talk about absorbing and evading, for the body kicks, he's going to absorb. For the side of his body, he's going to absorb. Lateral punches, he wants those so that he can evade and then counter. Because he knows that the majority of what they're going to throw, especially from a distance, is going to be a lateral punch. As you close that gap, you get into more of the hooks and stuff like that. But for the most part, from right here, because they feel like they have to reach them, they're going to throw a lot of jabbing and crossing. So he knows this, so he can slip out of the way. Now, as far as leg kicks, what you'll notice is as he comes in close, a lot of times you'll see him proactively checking. Or this is when he switches stance because he just doesn't even want to deal with this. It's easier for him to focus on outside foot position from a southpaw stance than it is for him to deal with that leg kick that's going to be occurring. He doesn't really want a powerful rear leg kick to tear up his game and make it hard for him to advance in. So sometimes it's easier to just switch stance. And because he's so ambidextrous and he can do the exact same things from both guards and he knows the differences so well, he's very comfortable in doing that. So essentially what happens then is he runs into a situation where most of the attacks that get thrown at him, he gets the occasional kick, which he sweeps through or he catches. He has leg kicks that he can proactively check or switch stance. So the majority of what gets thrown at him, because people don't feel like they have access to these hooks and stuff like that, is lateral techniques. This is why his countering game is so sick, because he knows what's coming at him. When all you have to deal with is a jab and a cross, it's very easy to go pop and just slip and counter punch. And this is what he does really well. It works for him. So that's the majority of what you're going to see defensively out of him. Now, like I said, the first part of his game is absorb and evade. The next thing he's going to do is use that to set up counters. Now, we're going to talk about counters later on, but that is a big part of it. He's going to evade, and he's going to try to get to his counters. Now, one thing I did want to mention that I forgot to mention in the defensive part too, a thing that he does a lot is he takes this bowing step, and he puts his hand out there to cover this lane. This is a big part of this. As guys throw attacks, a lot of times what he's going to do is he's going to bow down here and just add that in. When we talk about combos, he ties this in with combos as well. We'll talk about that more later. But one of the things he's going to do is he's going to bow down and evade anything incoming to slip underneath it and then come back up and counter. So when you talk about evading, that is a big part of the evading. It's slip, it's bow down, and then come back up with an attack. Those are the two primary things that he likes to do, although he has some other things as well. But the majority of his defense seems to be based on absorb and evade, or absorb and evade, stuff like that. Okay? Now, the next thing that he does, like I said, he's going to do counters. We'll talk about that in the next section. But then he's going to start trying to identify where your weaknesses are. And once he does that, it's like blood in the water. So this is why the first round, it's very similar to like what Anderson Silva did. He did it for the same reason. He wants to find out what your strengths and weaknesses are. So he wants to get a feel for you as a fighter. So what he's going to do is, whenever you see Petr Yan in the first couple rounds, you'll notice he pretty much never throws the same combination twice. What he does is he makes it up. He goes, pah, pah. Okay, I know how you respond to that now. Then he goes, pah, 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 right? And so he starts doing things to see how you respond to different types of attacks. So, bah, bah. And what he starts to look for is how well you defend each of these different things. And he's looking for changes in elevation, changes in timing, changes in pressure. He wants to see what your common reaction is. You know, if your tendency is to move back like this, he goes, okay, I can go to the body, right? He starts looking for how you respond to each of these attacks. And then what he's going to do is he's going to find the thing you don't respond very well to, and he's going to go back to that, and he's going to mix it up. He's going to go back to it, and he's going to mix it up. A good example of that is Jimmy Rivera. Jimmy Rivera, he figured out early on, this guy, if I throw a jab followed by a head kick, he doesn't react very well to it, especially if I don't overuse it and I mix in other stuff. And so he kept catching him with the same thing over and over again. John Dodson was another one. John Dodson's this wild guy, right? He's a very aggressive, wild fighter. So he realized that he was susceptible to having a good jab cross right down the pipe, right? This is the thing he kept getting hit with. And then once he started getting hit with that, he used the threat and variable principle where he did it, pop, pop, pop. And he kept going back to this, right? And then as Dodson starts defending this, he switches up, pop, and he goes back to the body. Then Dodson has to deal with this threat. So then he goes, pop, pop, and he starts going back to the head. And he creates this dilemma principle where if you defend the primary threat, you leave yourself open to the new threat. And then what I'm really trying to get. If you try to defend this, I go back home to where I know you're already weak. And this is what he does really well. So a lot of his game is based on this idea of forward pressure, finding your weakness, and then going back to it over and over again. And like I said, he does a lot of distance covering to make that happen so that you can't run away from him. If you try to stand tight, he's able to get inside because of his tight high guard. He wants this inside game anyway. So it all kind of plays to his strengths. And he pulls you back where he wants you. Okay? So that's the first part, just talking about the basic structure of what he does. The next part, we're going to talk about combinations. Okay, so for combinations, while Petr Yan does occasionally throw in some things like a heavy roundhouse kick, particularly when he hasn't closed the gap yet to try to really implement his boxing, you will see him on the outside throwing these heavy roundhouse kicks. And then as he starts to close the gap, he can start working to his game. But really, offensively, what he's looking for is combinations that are going to tie in with his countering game. It's very similar to Valentina Shevchenko we did last month in that regard, where he creates the dilemma principle that as you come in, he can come in here and counter, like he anticipates and he starts coming here, he check hook. He's going to create a situation where it's very tough to enter on him because he's absorbing and evading and countering. Then offensively, he wants to use combinations to overwhelm you. Now, I'm a big combo guy myself, so these principles of change in direction, change in distance, change in timing, change in elevation, all this stuff, this stuff appeals to me a lot because a lot of my combo game is built on this same premise. And what he does that I find very interesting is he uses smaller pieces of combinations that he ties together in the way that he needs. And this is where you talk about expert level striking. You know, one of the things that John Danaher says when he talks about his enter the system stuff is he talks about how a system needs to be complex enough that it can deal with any situation and it can be hard for your opponent to keep up with, but then it needs to be simple enough that you can implement it under pressure. And this is what he does really well. So he's got a couple things he likes to do. Like I said, he likes using this blitzing footwork. He likes to punctuate with these big, heavy hooks at the end of it so that as he comes in, bam! He likes to punctuate that way. He likes to throw a lot of lead hand that he switches up to this lead hand hook. That's a very common thing, by the way, where you throw the jab into the hook and then you throw the hook to the jab. So he does stuff like that. He likes to drop to the body as he starts getting to your head. He likes to switch it up and go down low. And he might do this a couple times where, right? He likes doing that type of stuff. These are a couple of his common tactics. And what he does is he starts tying them together depending on your reaction. So he's got these 4 or 5 things that he likes to do, and he waits to see how you're going to respond. And this is where we get into the interesting part of him. One of the things that he does is, first of all, he can react very quickly in the moment anyway. So sometimes he just goes pop, 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 chases them down, and then finishes with the big hook, or, bah. Sometimes he just does that. Sometimes what you'll see him do is he'll take a break in the middle of it, and he'll take this bow where he leaves this hand hanging out there to kind of cover the lane, and he takes a bow so that it gives them a moment to respond. If they throw a counter punch, he goes, okay, and he can counter the counter in the middle of this because he knows that as he throws this pop, 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 he's going to drop down just for the briefest split second, and as they throw a counter punch, he then is going to come up and do his own counter. Or he's going to judge to see how they respond to what he's given them so far. So if he comes high, if they start covering up high, now he knows he can go to the body. If they start backing up and doing this type of stuff, then he can go, pah, and follow through with it. Sometimes he takes a minute, well, not even a minute, it's a split second in the middle of a combination to see what you're going to do. and he comes down, and then he waits, and then he completes. It's a very subtle thing. I don't think a lot of guys realize he's doing it. It's just a thing that as he throws, he likes to drop down and then complete his combination. It is a smart thing to do to add it to his combinations as a technique that he does. Is one of his micro combinations. Like I said, he's got these micro combinations. They all form together to make a giant combination like Voltron. And this is one of the things he does, is he has the jab to the hook. He has the jab to the body, right? He has this, the jab and the blitzing punching. He's got this punctuating the hook, and he's got this dropping down in the middle of it to take a second and see what they're doing. This is extremely high-level stuff. It's something I want to start working into my game because it's really brilliant. And the more I started watching footage of him, the more I started catching him doing it, I was like, oh, look at this guy. It's very cool stuff. So this is something I want you to pay attention to when you're doing your own striking is, if you notice, this is a very safe position to be for the most part. He's covered the lane, his head's down. This is something very similar to how GSP used to throw his jabs. And I've talked about this before, where he used to come in here, he'd throw this jab, and he'd keep his head covered from here. And this way, he was relatively safe. Except he does it a little bit better than GSP, where GSP tended to come here, and it left him susceptible to that lead hand uppercut. As he comes in here, he keeps this hand here, covering the side of his face. His head is down. He's bowing over. He's not very susceptible to kicks. He's not very susceptible to punching. And takedowns, he's pretty well defended. If they try to go to it, he can switch very easily, because while these guys are scrambling, trying to figure out what the fuck they're going to do, he's in the moment. He's in the zone. He's zen. He's cool. He's already a step ahead of them. And this is really brilliant stuff. Now, as this stuff starts happening, like I said, he starts looking for how they're going to respond to stuff. So he goes, jab, hook, cross, and then he might go pop, 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 and chase guys back. And he kind of waits to see how they're going to respond to that in early rounds, where he pop, 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 explores things, right? Then what's going to happen is, as he starts progressing on, he starts setting these things up. And this is what he does, is if you notice a lot of his fights, he catches guys with the same technique over and over again. Because in the first 2 rounds, he figures out what they're going to do when he throws this. And then he throws stuff, and he goes back to it. He throws stuff, goes back to it. It's very similar to, if you look at the Giga kick, we talked about Giga Chikadze on the pre-fight analysis. He throws this roundhouse, roundhouse, roundhouse. But he doesn't do it in a row. He doesn't go, ha! Right? He throws stuff in between. So he goes, ha, 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 ha. And then he starts setting up his patterns and breaking them. And Petr Yan does the same thing. You don't throw the same thing 3 times in a row. You throw, with Jimmy Rivera, he throws a jab, ha, and he throws that high section roundhouse. Sorry, I'm not stretched out. And then he takes a break, and then he goes back to it after he does some other stuff, right? This is really high-level stuff. I want to touch briefly on feinting. One of the things you'll see him do, particularly as he gets guys backed up against the cage a lot, he starts doing step feint, right? He feints his jab a lot, because he knows that as he gets the cage, he needs to mix it up a little bit more. From a distance, he can chase guys and overwhelm them. From the cage, they're going to cover up and get compact. So he's going to feint and get his opening. He does a lot of rear hip feints, too, to feint that roundhouse kick. Another tactic he uses. Against the cage, he's a scary dude. One of the things he does, he likes to go right hand jab to an uppercut. Why? Because a lot of guys, when you get up against the cage, they tend to run to the right, and they're going to drop out this way. Now, there's guys who exploit that in different ways. You look at guys like Glover Teixeira and Edson Barboza. Talk about guys who are going to come to the side and start cutting off that lane. He's okay with you doing it. He just wants to get the most out of it as you start dropping away. So he's going to go jab, and as you start bowing down, pam, big uppercut. Or he goes here, and he throws this knee strike. He knows the tendency is to run this way, so he exploits it. Probably the thing I would say he's best at is understanding what common reactions are to his attacks and being able to follow up on those in the right way. And this is where 70 amateur boxing fights and an undefeated UFC record, this is what it gives you, is the ability to do this. Very high level stuff. This is what we're all looking for in our game. So when you build your system, have your attacks that you like to use, have them tie in together, and then start looking for how people react to them, and start building transitions from there. In the same way that in wrestling, we talked about Islam Makhachev. he does a single leg or he does an outside trip, and he knows what you're going to do if you try to defend this. And he's already moving to the defense, to the transition off of your defense before you've even completed your defense. He's doing the same thing. Petr Yan's doing this from a striking perspective. He throws an attack, he knows the common reaction, and he's already moving into it, so it doesn't matter. This is why his combo game is so brilliant. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this part. Next part, we're going to talk about how he does countering, and we're going to finish up with some takedowns and stuff like that and some clinches, all right? Okay, when it comes to counters, this is going to be a relatively short section because a lot of this I've already covered. Remember, his principle is essentially to absorb and evade so that he can counter in the early rounds and start breaking them down to identify where their weaknesses are. And then, as it goes on, he's going to start turning up the volume. So, early on, like I said, it's going to be a lot of this long guard. As he comes in, he's going to tighten up ranks. He's primarily going to be dealing with a lot of counters for the jab cross because he's created a space where he can funnel him down to that. If they try to come from the side, it's easy for him to get inside on it. And they feel less compelled to throw things to the side when your guard is clearly tight in those areas. When you look at like the fight against Aljamain Sterling, who's just trying to throw a lot of like volume at him, he wasn't too worried about it. Like, he just moved his head, and then he waited for things to come down the pipe, and he slipped and he threw counter crosses. Any kicks that come down the middle, he can just swat through, he can catch, and he'll do a Muay Thai cut kick off of. If you try to go to a leg kick, he'll just switch stance. So what he's trying to do is funnel you down to the jab cross, like I said. And the reason is, it's a very easy thing to counter when you know what they're going to be throwing over and over again. So the majority of what he runs into is the jab cross. Now, if you do try to go for the single leg, no problem. He has a great single leg defense. He knows that the single leg is the most common takedown from here. So he gets really good at it. He does a lot of overhooking, gets his foot on the outside frame up. And what he does that I really like is he likes to take this overhook, yank him across into a counter cross. So he like pulls them into his cross. And I really like that he does that. It's a very, very nice use of the technique. But most of it is going to boil down to slip and counter, bow down and come up with like an uppercut, or bow down and come up with a hook, or some sort of variation of that. Catch the kick, Muay Thai cut kick. If they try to shoot, okay, come to the outside frame, yank them across, and then cross to the face. And his wrestling is very good. One of the things that I think that he's almost a little bit underestimated for is how good his wrestling is, particularly his wrestling defense and getting back to his feet. So he's pretty feeling comfortable about that. So when he knows that most of the attacks coming are going to be these two types of jab crosses coming at him, it makes it pretty easy to counter consistently over and over and over again. And that's really what his countering system is based on. Okay? Alright, so as usual, I want to finish with takedowns and grappling. He's an interesting takedown guy. He will take down with the idea of getting some ground and pound, but I think a lot of times he's taking down for points. He would much prefer to box him, but takedowns, if they're there, he's going to take them. But the other thing is, it makes him more of a threat in different areas, so guys feel like they always have to be concerned about the takedown, and particularly because the way he does takedowns is kind of unique. It's very rare to see a guy like him shoot a single or a double, which are probably the most common takedowns in MMA. Instead, what you see him do a lot of is, as he comes in here, you know, there's this thing that occurs a lot of times in boxing or in striking where you get shoulder to shoulder and you're not really engaged in a clinch. You're just kind of briefly tied up with them. And when this moment occurs, he comes up with a high elbow, steps through into his Osoto Gari. And he is good at this. He hits this on a lot of guys. I think he hit it like twice on Aljamain Sterling. And he gets in shoulder to shoulder, and especially as they start trying to drive through, he uses this as a countering tactic as well. So he bows down, like I said, and as they come through, he'll come up with a high punch, and he's going to hit him with the bicep right into it. And it's a very quick takedown, and it's just kind of an attack of opportunity. If he gets down underneath and this guy's pressuring forward, he's going to come up with it, and he's going to get it. He hits this very frequently. What he will do is, instead of a single leg though, is he will hit an outside trip. And a lot of times this occurs because he likes to go to the back. And so as he comes through, he might start sliding out this way, and as he does, what he's going to do is he's going to go to the outside trip, he's going to come here, and he's going to hook the leg, pop, and pop it forward. Once again, instead of a classic single, which most guys are expecting, he does something a little bit different where he's in here, he's bowing, he's going to go to the back. Guy maybe backs up so he feels like he can get it. He's going to hook the leg and do the outside trip. Pop. The third thing that he likes to do a lot is a reverse Tai Otoshi. Like I said, he likes to get to the back on guys, so he might be here, pop, pop, and he'll slide out and get to a back. And then what he does is a really unique takedown that you don't see thrown a lot. Most guys like to valley drop or climb a backpack. He does this. He switches his stance, drops down, and does a reverse Tai Otoshi as he pulls them over. So, can't show it very well on the bob, but essentially, as he slides through to the back, he gets to here, he steps across, and he just pulls them down. Most of the time he lands this, he comes down in almost like an S-mount stretch, and so he kind of just falls over into it. It's a very interesting throw. I've heard it also called a reverse valley drop. It's not a super common throw, but for him it is. And he hits us a lot, and it's a cool throw. But he likes to get to a back, and then once he gets here, he likes to switch his stance and come through because guys are not usually prepared to deal with it very well. It works very similar to a valley drop, where I come here and I kind of fall back. But, like I said, he switches his stance to do it and he pulls them over in front of him. So instead of kind of falling and being half on their back, he pulls them down so that he is on top of it. And I think maybe that's why he does it, is just to make sure that he ends up on top. So those are the primary throws he gets, aside from when he catches kicks, and then he does a Muay Thai cut kick. When he gets guys to the ground, his strategy is basically ground and pound. He is not trying to engage in long, drawn-out jiu-jitsu battles. He basically either goes to one of two positions. He gets to a top half guard, and a lot of times he'll put his knee on their elbow, so it's kind of like a half crucifix, drop bombs, or he'll get to a closed guard and stack them and throw bombs. That's basically it. But there's times where he drops guys down, he stands up, he goes, nah, let's keep going up top. He wants to get the points for getting the takedown. He wants them to be afraid of the takedown as a potential threat that can occur at any time, because he throws it in unpredictable ways at unpredictable times. So the guys don't sense when it's coming, so it gives them another level of fear, another thing they have to deal with when engaging with him. But if he doesn't feel like engaging at it, sometimes he'll just stand up and go, yeah, we'll just keep going. He just wants to get the points and create that extra dimension to his game. Whereas some guys are really focused on getting to the ground. Like if you compare that with somebody like a Glover Teixeira who just fought, his goal is to get to the ground and dominate. That's not Petr Yan's game. He'll get there, he'll throw some bombs, and he's finished fights from there. But that's not really his primary focus. His primary focus is to get him there and get points. And then on top of that, like sometimes he has been taken down. It's very rare to take this guy down because, like I said, he anticipates the single leg, so it makes it easy for him to deal with. But when he has been taken down, what you'll see is he puts feet on the hips. He's just trying to get back to his feet. He's not trying to engage in this closed guard game. He puts his feet on the hips, gets him clear. He recovers to a butterfly guard, or he recovers to his knees and gets to like a bandolier position and then gets back to standing. Clinching is kind of the same principle. He doesn't want to engage a long clinch. He's going to frame out and throw elbows, just like on the ground. He's just going to get back to his feet. That's really his game. He wants to box them, and so he does everything he can to put that fight where he's strongest, which is his boxing. And it works for him. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this system breakdown. I really enjoyed putting it together. He's a very interesting fighter, very dynamic, and he's a great example of a guy who builds a system around his strengths. Thanks for watching, guys.